Hello, I'm male feminist Anders Bloom. Give you a big welcome.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Reflections, and for this one I am joined by Johnny R. And let's just start at the beginning, Johnny, because Jonas, which is obviously your real name, which is, there's a detail which is a lot of people will know you as a legendary German Counter-Strike figure. Obviously, you're associated with the AWP. But I actually have sort of a mildly edgy question to ask you, mate, which is I watched and was around for all of Counter-Strike. And I actually always thought a cool thing about your career is you did have this LAN career and all this success and became a very respected player. But if people don't know, the first time I ever heard of you was I remember seeing the online demos before mousesports, where it was just Johnny R. and he was going crazy against pubs and against like teams I'd never heard of online. And at the time, bro, I can tell you, everyone who wasn't from the German scene, because there wasn't EPS back then, we didn't know the German teams. We only knew like maybe SK Gaming who came to the LANs. Everyone thought you cheated or you were like hacking or you were using interp or something. Can I just ask you at the beginning, what would you say about that aspect? In the early days, did you use a config? I'm assuming you don't cheat or anything, but just give me your thoughts on that, because it was a thing in the early days before you got to LAN, right?
Well, I think, to tackle it a little bit from all sides, I think, of course, first of all, I never cheated in that sense. Talking about configs, I think initially the configs weren't even a thing. You know, maybe the first thing that came out was buy scripts and everything.
Right.
The things with interp, they really came only a lot, I would say a lot later, but they got the network settings got immensely popular in a very short time. I think it even to the point where it was adapted by tournaments to force default values or certain values or whatsoever. I think in Germany they had the most strict rules. I think the rules in for the CPL tournaments was a bit more relaxed on those, but there wasn't really a concise element on how to do it. Of course, what I would say, I was always very transparent. I mean, you could download my config, I was sharing it, so it's not like something that was, not available for everyone else to use. In the end, in the end, it's one of these things. I think the first time I really got in contact, heard about it, I think it was Clan Z using it. I heard it from someone who played with mTw at the time. They shared those configs, and basically we looked at some of the settings, and that was in there. And I mean, outright, of course, if you have the better settings, or it gives you a certain advantage, especially with the very old netcode that was around there. So yeah, I mean, everyone started to use it. So of course, so did I. I mean, this was kind of, I wouldn't say, the baseline, but I think every player on a higher level used a certain network config at the time until it was fully regulated. But most used, I think, about the same settings.
Yeah. Well, by the way, though, let me just address the social aspect then. Were you aware of this aspect where people were like flaming you online or saying like, oh, he'd never do that online or he's cheating or something? Were you aware of this? I know there wasn't social media, but like on forums, this is what people used to say.
I think I was somewhat aware. I mean, this was like one of the onliner, the standard insult also in Germany and thing. I think this was a very common thing. I think we also did perform quite well on LAN events, I would say. But online is it's always easy, but there's a site config, an online game back then was never really 100% fair. I remember a lot of games you took 10, 15 minutes or even longer way before the match started to find a server that both parties could agree on because of latency and everything, which is less of an issue today.
Sure.
So yeah, I think people were always looking forward to how people performed on LAN, because on the internet they would say, oh yeah, this guy has, I didn't have ping 10 or something, but for us, it was always like the Swedish teams, they had a ping of less than 10, and we were like, if we had also this line, we would do a lot better. So yeah, LAN was even for us also the preferred method of play.
Right. One of the things people might not be aware about you is you were one of the founding members of mousesports. You weren't just a player who joined. In fact, when you made the team, obviously it wasn't a famous team and it wasn't the best team in Germany even. It just later became that. Can you give me some thoughts about this? Because actually you were the big name associated with the team. So what was the founding like? How did this come about?
Yeah, so I think before mousesports, there was a team called Mystical Lambda. There were some people involved in the founding of that. I mean, the goal was to basically found a Berlin-based Counter-Strike team.
Right.
And I'm not sure which year that was anymore, but at some point, I mean, this team was, I would say, somewhat successful, but not like, I mean, we're not talking about any esport tournament level like we are talking today. I mean, we're talking about winning some LAN parties, some small tournaments, but not like going to a full stadium with everything full of people watching you and what it is today. So I think we were somewhat successful in what we were doing, but at some point we wanted to professionalize it a little bit more. So what happened was we got some more people in who had some more marketing experience and something else. One of the investors or founders also of Mystical Lambda was Yilmaz Ozan, who was involved there as well. I think one of the guys from mousesports. Then we worked together with people from, I think the company is now called Freaks for You. I'm not sure it was called that back then.
Right.
But probably yes. And yeah, they kind of did the marketing aspect for it. And we basically merged the Mystical Lambda team with some adjustments into mousesports. So at that point, what happened is, I mean, saying we got paid is probably a bit of an overstatement. We're talking a couple of €100 here.
Right.
Not sure that was even from the start. We were talking about like maybe a free graphics card.
Right. From the sponsor or whatever.
Or like a free internet line of €50 a month. So it's not like it's like that in any case. But yeah, this is kind of how mousesports came to be. It was actually Mystical Lambda who was the original organization behind it. But the idea for this team actually didn't come from me, but I joined into the idea pretty soonish after I heard about it. I recall as long ago we had a very small LAN party where we kind of met for the first time and played together, and we were quite successful. Right. That was also in Berlin. Yeah, and it went from there. Probably 25 years ago.
Something like that, yeah.
Know.
Right, I thought as we go through the interview, I'll try and pick appropriate moments to ask about some of your teammates. So obviously from this first mousesports, I need to ask about one of the most famous teammates you had at that time, which was a guy who obviously you all used that same naming scheme, Roman R, who I think is at this point a mouse legend. Who was this guy? What type of a player was he?
I think if you talk about the game sense, I think it would say rifler. I think he was initially, I'm not sure from the start or in the midterm, but he was also a shot caller back then in the team. So he was a very consistent player. I think, and more, I would say, more calm than myself. I wouldn't say I was the most, let's say, calm player, but he was always very, calm and consistent. Very, very strong player for sure. I only met him when we started Mystical Lambda, I think the team that went into mousesports later. So yeah, I'm not sure how that happened, but he was also from Berlin, so that of course contributed to the fact that he ended up in the same Berlin-based team.
I saw one of the earliest events you went to was the CPL they had in Cologne. So what was it like to go to an event in Germany and have all these world famous teams come?
So CPL Cologne, if I recall correctly, I think I didn't even play that one. So I'm not actually sure.
Oh, fair enough.
I think maybe we played it with a stand-in. I think there was, maybe this one we can cut out. I would need to double check because as I recall in Germany, there was some... Like
an age restriction or something maybe?
Maybe
like an age restriction or something?
There was an age restriction for sure. So one of the big issues I had in the beginning is that I couldn't attend all tournaments because of my age. So that was basically a big blocker in some countries or events. So we needed a stand-in, but this was also with Mystical Lambda the case, and then later also with mousesports initially. But yeah, this is German regulations.
Yeah, sure.
Put it this way.
Sure. All right. What about by the way, if people don't know the famous saying in Germany, rules are rules. That is the famous saying that people go by. So, okay, what about this then? I'll ask you about one of the first famous tournaments that was a good one. I was actually at this tournament. I remember you guys went to CPL Oslo in Norway. And at the time, I can tell you, and this was actually a theme of your career, at the time, all the Nordic teams were supposed to be the best in Counter-Strike. Like, Germany was kind of like the UK with Four Kings. Maybe you could have one team that could be good, but you're never supposed to beat the top teams. This was actually quite a shocking event because, first of all, if people thought you were an onliner, your team did awesome at this event. And actually, you guys came third. You beat a whole bunch of the Nordic teams too. What was this event like? Do you remember?
Yeah, so CPL Oslo was a pretty cool event. I think for us, it was also one of the first international events we were traveling. I mean, I think we were sharing a hotel room with 4 or 5 people at the time, or maybe 6, I don't remember. So this kind of tells a bit of the story how cash-strapped all the organizations and everything was in the past, or how baseline. Let me think. I think it was at that tournament, I think, where we played, I think it was 6 or 7 overtimes. I think there was
there was a crazy game.
Yeah, that was, I would say, a bit unlucky. This was, I think it for years was the game where we ever played the most overtimes. Was pretty bad to lose out on that game. I think looking back, I think we had it in a few times and then gave away the win, but we also came back from behind a few times. Yeah, it's a bit annoying that we lost there. But yeah, I think who was against? Was it NOA or was it?
No, it was Eolithic. It was Element's team, and then there was the MTW, the Swedish one with Al and those guys, if you remember. Yeah.
There were so many Nordic teams back then. Got to pick up a bit. Yeah, but this was actually a very good game. But I think the funny thing at that point was that I'm not really sure. I think they were close to saying, okay, if you tie again, you have to throw a coin or something, because it really stretched the schedule. But yeah, I think back then there was also very good tournament memory for us to perform quite well there. But there was more potential there to be realized. But we simply, I would say we're unlucky, or they were the better team. But I think with 7 overtimes, you can argue it was pretty close.
Sure. And then after this, you also had the tournament where you went to the World Cyber Games, which, if people don't know, at the time was actually held in South Korea, which is obviously, I imagine, a crazy experience. Okay. And this was the one where you actually won a medal. You got the bronze medal, and you did like an epic run and beat like Team 3D and a bunch of famous squads. Do you remember? Going to Korea must have been a pretty crazy experience.
Yeah, so Korea was really crazy because it was the first time where you were in a country where esports was really something that socially accepted. It was really a super professionally set up tournament. It wasn't, the scale of it was really, really crazy. So I think there was in 2002 or 2003, so quite long ago as well. This was really for us a first one. One thing that I didn't like about this tournament that I distinctively remember is that the computers there were pretty bad. So what happened is that some teams, they played kind of a strategy where they would use smoke grenades to kill people's frames per second and just rush into that. So this aside, I think it was a great tournament, but even though we did well, I think it didn't really show the strengths and weaknesses of all of the teams because of the bad computer hardware they had there. I think this had to do with the fact that the main game in Korea at the time was StarCraft 2, which didn't really have any huge hardware requirements. So I think it was built a bit around that, and maybe the fact that they had hundreds of computers or systems there, and not just let's say 20 or so like on other tournaments. So they might have been also a bit more concise on the spending.
One thing I want to ask is, keep going, sorry.
Yeah, but the experience of the tournament for sure was pretty great. It was run extremely professional. And one thing that was super crazy is that it was the first time where we actually turned on the TV and you could watch StarCraft on TV. It was pretty surreal for us.
Right. One thing is, obviously, we're not going to ask about every event. So I thought I would bundle all the EPS Germany stuff in this question, which is, I always tell people it was actually, in theory, Germany that had its first like proper like domestic professional scene. Like, obviously, we had amazing tournaments, CPL, ESWC, WCG that you went to. But I always tell people, if they ever go back and look at EPS Germany, the funding was amazing, mate. I think first place was like 15,000 euros or something. And this is only German teams that had a whole it was almost like the Bundesliga had a whole regular season. Then they had the LAN playoffs. There was even, I think, quite early on, there was like streaming setups and stuff. There was those like Friday night game. Can you give me some thoughts on this? Because I feel like people who weren't in the German scene don't know how actually this is quite developed. It's kind of a bit ambitious.
Yeah, I think so. I think the major thing of the ESL Pro Series or EPS was that they basically took an online league and added a LAN or tournament component to it. So what happened is, I think the first thing that ever happened was the Intel Friday night game in Cologne. So they were working with, I think it was an internet cafe at the time. And they basically they had a room for watching the game and always two teams playing kind of like in the room on the side with the 10 computers. So what they did was basically the league was online, but every week there was a game that was also played on LAN and casted, and that was actually also quite professional. Intel being the main sponsor, I think it was called Intel Friday Night Game from all I can remember, they really put quite some money into it, and I think I have to give credit here. Intel was probably one of the main drivers also for esports in Germany back in the day, or one of the early investors that gave prize money. I think this was also true for CPL, where Intel was very invested. But yeah, in Germany, you're right, I would say this was the most stable league. I mean, has been around for ages now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, they really professionalized it from a lot of things, like with a nice moderation, with everything. The only thing I would say is probably bad about it is that, I mean, it was only in German and everything, right? So maybe internationalizing it a bit earlier could have been better. But yeah, for Germany and German esports, that was the thing.
I saw that in one of the other CPLs you went to early on when mousesports got good. You went to this one, Cannes, in France, and the team that you played there that beat you was Vesslan's Team 9, so it was a Swedish team. So I actually have a two-part question. We'll see what you can remember on this. One, I actually know that because I was friends with Vesslan. He was actually one of the rare Swedish leaders who tried to do tactical CS, which, by the way, as people might know, just like in football, German CS is pretty famous for being about tactics and roles and people having timings and stuff. So one, I want to know, did you remember anything about this team? And two, would you, to me, that was quite rare because as far as I know, I think Swedish teams were fairly sort of loose and they kind of just played off skill and stuff. What would you say? What was it like to play like against Swedish teams and maybe this team, if you can remember?
Well, I think every team was a bit different and we kind of had the tactics down. I think this game I particularly remember, I think it was an Inferno, if I'm not mistaken, where we ultimately dropped.
Yes, it was a very close game.
Tournament.
Yes.
Yeah, that was also a close game. I think every time, I mean, you can always argue this, but I think the games I mostly remember from the past were either, of course, the larger wins or the very, let's say, the very close games where we lost by a hairline or something. I mean, yeah, back then, Team 9 for sure was one of the one of the top teams as well. I'm not sure they ended up winning this tournament in the end.
No, they came second. SK with Heaton and Potty won.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I think you're right with your assessment that you say Swedish teams were more about individual skill and everything. But I think this was really something that was pretty much there in the early days of Counter-Strike anyways. It wasn't, I mean, you had tactics, right? But it wasn't as detailed as it is today. I mean, with the smokes that you throw pixel precise over walls and everything. So back then it was what we did, for example, we practiced certain rushes or certain tactics, and those were then executed more or less, or how do you defended spots. But I think today there's a lot more refined play to that. So it's really a big difference, I would say, how it's played. I would also argue the game had to become more tactical, because if you remember the very old betas of Counter-Strike where there was still bunny hopping, that was, I think, only taken out. I'm not even sure at what point.
I think it got taken out early in retail. I know what you mean, though. Basically, the early versions were a bit almost like Quake. It was like you could move quite fast.
Yeah. There are a couple of things they took out that the early versions had. For example, accuracy while jumping was then still pretty good. Let's put it like this. There was no stopping after jumping. So this was kind of the fix for bunny hop, if I recall. And I think also there were some AWP was also killing with a shot in the foot. So you just need to hit any pixel. So there was a lot of things that also changed about the game that pushed it into a more tactical way of play, I would say. Also, I think the fact back then you played time limit, right? Yes. So you had to rush. If you would play slow, it would basically, the time was playing against you. When they switched to max rounds, it was more important to, let's say, win this exact round or try to make the best of it, rather than, trying to die as fast as possible or plant a bomb as fast as possible in your pistol, in your save round, right? There you go. So, I think a lot of factors contributed to that, and also to the change of play style. But most of the teams that were around very early, I don't remember being very tactical from the start.
Right. One thing, since you're so famously associated with being a sniper and using the AWP, I will say back then, actually, I thought that was the weapon where a lot of people, it's funny they called you an onliner, mate, because I thought a lot of really good AWPers online would go to LAN and you could tell they were nervous, and sometimes they didn't even use the gun. And actually, you did actually stay true to your style. You would play with the AWP every time it was available. You were a proper sniper. Do you think you were one of the best snipers? Did you feel like that when you played against people?
It's very hard to say. I would say I was pretty good. The best is always very hard. I would say on the top level, it always depended on the daily form that you were in or not. It also always depended a bit on how the team played against you. I would say if you are regarded as one of the better players in the team, they study very. Back then there was a lot of demos and everything, so people studied how you would play and everything. So I would say it was a lot harder to play on LAN than online, because people really, really prepared a lot more, and you could really see that from the flashbangs and the smokes that were coming. So, there was a lot more preparation coming back at the time. Coming back to the fact why I played AWP a lot. If you played Counter-Strike in the super early days, AWP was immensely strong as a weapon. As I mentioned, you could kill basically with any hit. So it was like an insta-kill more or less, which they only revised later, that shooting people in the foot is probably not enough to kill them.
Sure.
So I really like to play with that weapon. There were also some other things that I'm not really sure. You remember the green crosshair and everything, getting some nostalgic vibes here. But there were basically teams that were mostly playing with AWPs, and only, I would say, later when they nerfed it a little bit, rifles and everything got more popular. I think also some other weapons got a slight nerf. I remember Desert Eagle also being extremely strong. So AWP Desert Eagle was kind of the way to play back in the day. But yeah, that changed quite a lot when things got more tactical and everything. People would actually use, I mean, back then there was no smokes too, right? So they would use flashes better. They would start using smokes and everything. So yeah, changed a lot. Not sure I can say I liked every change, because you had to also adjust your play style slightly. But yeah, I still like playing AWP more than rifles. I wouldn't say I was a bad rifler, but for sure nowhere near the level where some of the best were there in the game.
In these early mousesports lineups, it wasn't just a German team. You had 2 Austrian players, actually, that I thought I'd ask about. So one is quite famous. It's Gore, and he continued on many, many more years. But actually, the other one, Impi, didn't have that much longer of a career. He had like a couple more years, and maybe people don't remember him. Can you remember something about these 2 guys, or something about their personality or this play or something?
Yeah, I think, well, both are very nice guys. I think we Germans always appreciated the Austrian accent or comments in I think back then it was Battlecom that was used as a voice tool of choice. I think I think out of the 2, of course, over the career, Gore was more famous. Very good rifler, arguably the best player coming from Austria, I would say. With Impi, I think I played only for a short time. I think I recall, being in Austria at some point, and I think it was his and his friend's place, where we were having like a LAN party, which was also still a thing back in the day. So yeah, there was I think both quite good players, both mostly Gore for sure, mostly rifler. I think Impi was also playing a bit of AWP, but yeah.
Right. One thing is, there's actually, if people don't know, even though you were in mousesports for many years, there was once a famous drama, and I want to know what you can remember about this, because there was once a time where all of a sudden Johnny R wasn't in mouse anymore, and then he went and he joined Advanced Online Losers, and you look, we'll get to it in a minute, but you kind of had your own success there. Then you came back later. How did you end up leaving mousesports? Why at this period were you not in the team anymore? What happened?
Good question. I think it's to put it like this, I think there was somewhat of an opportunity to play with the people from like Blizzard. I think NEO it was back then.
Yeah. And
we were basically building another team. I'm not exactly sure what was the main trigger anymore, why that came to be in the end. But you have to see it like this. The scene always has been very small, right? So everyone kind of knew everyone. It's
right.
Probably today's still the same. It's not like, you don't know the people. If you went to one tournament or LAN party, the 20, 30 people that are always there, they were always there, right? Or the same was true for tournaments. I think the time in AL or AOL, how they were called then, I think they had to rename because of the famous German provider.
Right.
Or I think that's why they went to Germany. I think they got even sued for that. I think we played quite well together, but I'm not exactly sure anymore how the whole thing came to be. I think maybe someone else remembers a bit more distinctly. But after all, we then returned to mousesports at some point. So as a full team. So yeah, but this had more to do with the fact that, of course, mousesports was a more professional basis for a team. They could support going to tournaments better, or finding sponsors, which was a bit of an issue with A-losers back then. But yeah, that was a pretty cool time. I think the first tournament that we played there was, it was called GameGune or something.
Yeah, the one in Spain.
Was Bilbao? I thought.
Yeah, it was in Spain. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so there we won like a trip to a trip to the CPL in the US. And I remember I had to call my mother and was like, so we want this trip to the US. So I'm flying like basically there in 2 days.
Just
from
directly.
Spain.
Holy shit. Okay.
Yeah. That was really, it was really like you won this tournament. They booked you the ticket to go to and attend a CPL. So this at least what I remember, there was very short time in between.
What was it like, the CPL? I mean, I saw you came fourth. It was all the giant ones. So if people don't know back then, especially I'm sure if you're European, everyone knew about CPLs. Everyone had seen the demos and knew about, all the top teams. What was it like to actually attend one?
Yeah, so CPL I think was pretty great. I would say that we probably lacked a bit of the preparation for this tournament, but I think given that we did pretty okay. We did have really a lot of, we did have really a lot that took some good experiences from this tournament. There were, there were all the top teams there. So especially the US teams, which you never really played in Europe.
Sure.
So that was very tricky. That's probably where also we lacked most of the preparation on that end. Also, the play style was a bit different. And lastly, for us, it was like a bit overwhelming to play against the top teams back then. For sure, back then we were an underdog. We, of course, had aspirations to win the tournament, but I would say, was probably not realistic at that point. Win over, I think back then, SK Gaming won.
Yeah.
If I recall. But yeah.
By the way, in this era, did your teams actually, when you were at home, did you practice against like Swedish teams like SK and stuff? Did you get online games against them?
Yeah, so usually we practice a lot with European teams, with US teams, not at all. So that's what I mentioned earlier with the preparation against US teams wasn't really there, so you didn't know their play style. In the end, there were some teams we mostly practiced against German teams simply because it was the easiest to find a good, I would say, server for where everyone was okay with the latency. And also because we knew on the tournaments we were practicing for, we were not showing our tactics to people we would maybe directly compete on at the tournaments. Because, as I said, the scene was pretty small. The same was true for Germany. If you knew in the EPS next week you're playing, I don't know, a certain team on DE Nuke, then you would probably not want to practice DE Nuke against that team, right? At least not in the weeks before that. So, this was kind of always the thing that you tried or needed to practice with teams that you didn't really meet at the tournaments. But yeah, we practiced also with all of these teams. NIP, SK Gaming, later other Swedish teams and everything. There were the team managers were organizing it. But yeah, we kind of played everyone.
One of the key teammates you met in this Advanced Online Losers team that came with you to Mouse later was obviously Blizzard, who also became quite like a famous mousesports player. Who was Blizzard?
Who was Blizzard? Good question. I think he and NEO were kind of the people I knew the best at A-Losers when I joined back then. I think he was also would say more tactical player in the end, and he was probably the clutch player in A-Losers from what I recall. So every time it was going really bad, or you would say, okay, this round is over, nothing would work out anymore, he kind of pulled the rabbit out of the hat and it would suddenly turn into a completely different situation. At least this is my memories of that time, where he was really one of the people that really shined when things were not going so well, when it would kind of turn around a game. NEO, I think, is also, of course, one of the players I played with for a super long time. I think he still streams streams again. I'm not up to this day, but streams again and still plays some Counter-Strike. So yeah, he's probably around for now. One of the longest of all the German players that are still playing, I would say. But yeah, he's also a very consistent player. I think he was also quite famous from the NEO the One movie. I'm not sure it was.
But everyone who wasn't in Germany thought he must be the best player. His frags look sick, mate.
Yeah, that video was pretty good. The guy that made it for him, he did a really good job, and of course NEO, did a very even better job,
yes.
curating all these demos, all these frags and everything. Yeah, it was a great video. I think the only video I remember being more famous was Frag or Die, the very original one. But that wasn't a video where whoever was in there, could influence what scenes. Were put in the video or anything. I mean, I remember some people complained that the scene that was put in there, I was playing against noobs. I would say yes, it's probably true, but it's not like I submitted the scene to be put in die. There would have probably been other and better scenes that could have been used, but yeah.
Because when these players came back with you to mousesports, to me, that was one like the super team from the German and Austrian region. Like that was the one where it was Blizzard, you, Roman R, NEO, Gore. This is like a super team, basically. These are like all the best players, right?
I would say at the time, I would agree. There was really the super team we could build in Germany. And I think the results kind of spoke for itself. I think that we had like this curse, I would say, where we would rarely do worse than top 3, but also never really better on international tournaments. Yes. It was always like this third place curse, which was pretty weird. So yeah, I think the team itself was comprised of very good individual players that had been playing together either in the past already before or for most of their careers. I think like Blizzard and NEO played together for quite a long time, if I recall correctly. And yeah, I think building on that, we really professionalized it a bit more because we kind of knew if we didn't do that, we would never be able to keep up or even compete with some of the top teams in the world, which, I mean, compared to A-losers, had much better support, and mousesports could offer something equal. And when I'm talking about support, I'm not talking about paying a living salary. This was not really a thing back then. We got some money, but it's not like any amount that you can survive on. So it's okay if you live with your parents, you don't have to pay rent and everything, but it wouldn't be enough to support a family or anything in that regard. But if I talk about support, what I mean is you could attend the tournaments. I mean, flying or traveling internationally, hotel costs and everything was already quite substantial for most teams to handle. So I think there were also some other teams that were, I would say, not much worse, but they simply didn't have the means to attend all these tournaments.
Yes. By the way, one thing, you mentioned it yourself. I was going to ask, it does look like this team in all variations of different players. It's like you're right, there's like a third or fourth place curse where no matter how you do in the tournament, you just always seem to lose at that point. And in fact, there's a lot of times, you referenced this earlier, there's a lot of times the losing game is like overtime or one round away or really close. Was there something in like really close games that was missing? Because like I said, the perception was like, the Swedish teams are just better. But there's a lot of times you were closer, you could have gotten them.
I mean, the closest was probably the 7 overtimes thing. I think this was what I distinctively remember. That was bad. The one you mentioned on, I think it was Inferno against
Team 9.
Team 9 was also, I would say, fairly close. Yeah, Team 9. I think there was 1 or 2 tournaments where we lost by a larger margin. I think I remember one where we played SK Gaming, but I'm not sure this was the game that kicked us out ultimately. I would say, we could say we played, we were the most consistent team for sure. Sure. I think maybe besides SK Gaming. So I think we were very consistent. We were not on the level of SK Gaming, I would say, back in the day. But I think it had also to do a bit with the fact that, that we, I would say, professionalized only 90%, whereas other people went a bit further.
Right.
And
right.
I mean, I would say if we, practiced some people, for my time back then, I played almost more or less full time. Some other people, they of course had, they was studying at the same time or taking some time off. Some people were doing an apprenticeship or something. So it's not like, or going in school or something. So it's not like it was a full-time thing for everyone, and you had to kind of work around this a little bit. Yeah, so we had to work around this a little bit, but I think ultimately, I'm looking back at my career. I think this is one of the things I dislike the most, having been on the podium so many times, but never having actually one of the most prestigious, or S tier, how you would say, international tournaments, is a bit bugging.
By the way, since you referenced that aspect of the fact that, there were people who were still going to school, or they were doing an apprenticeship, or they had a job, how did you manage to get away with going full time in that sense? Was it not like a concern for your parents? Like, look, I don't know your background, but I'm imagining back then, German parents are going to be like, hey, go to school or get a job, or, be serious or something. How did you manage that? Yeah,
so I think my parents were at the time accepting, after there was some prize money to be won and everything. I wouldn't say that they're 100% happy about it.
Sure.
But, back then, today it might be different, but back then there wasn't really let's say, people, or my parents at least, wouldn't see that there is a career in being a Counter-Strike player, or like a long-term career, so to speak. Because of course you get older, and then at some point your reaction time and everything goes down. But also the monetary outlook was not that great. I mean, even if you were the top team and you would win every tournament, I would say, then you can make good money, but it's nowhere, it was nowhere near where it is today. Today is, I think, today it is on a level where even as a top 10, top 20, top 30 team, you can make a good living from it. There's multiple sources of income that simply didn't exist back in the day.
Yes.
Getting stickers, streaming, direct sponsorships from brands, which weren't really, I think there were one or two back in the day. Like I think I think SteelSeries did some, if I recall, but there wasn't really anything besides the salary or compensation you got monthly and the tournament winnings. And I think this is also one of the things that contributed partially to why why the game became less fun. I'm not sure other people mentioned it in the interview series. We did win some tournaments or some money in tournaments, but there was let's say, the big problem with some tournaments paying out the money, CPL being one of them.
Oh, wow, really? Okay.
Yeah, that was really a thing. So we didn't receive quite some prize money back in the day. They basically, they just didn't pay some people. I think this was not only CPL, but also we played, I think, CXG tournament, where when we went, this one I distinctively remember, we went to Las Vegas, and then they basically, I think they claimed hardware reasons or something. They canceled the tournament.
Cyberx Gaming,
they canceled the tournament on the spot, and we were like, "What the hell?" We just spent a lot of money to come here, and they were like, "No worries, guys. You can play a game on stage for $10,000 I think it was back in the day." And I remember we won the game, but we never got the money.
Right.
And it's not, it's not that it's not that $10,000. I mean, not for the whole team. Not like individually everyone would get 10,000. It would have made the largest difference, but this kind of shows that there was a lot of uncertainty also on the prize money that you would get. ESL, as an example, we never had any issues. CPL, I think, especially for the US ones, on 2 occasions, we did not get paid as far as I can recall, or one time we got paid super late, like a year after the event, and then only partially. So yeah, this was one of the things that was really, annoying to say the least. But I think today this is also a lot better. I mean, if today is a tournament, you don't pay the players, or it doesn't get paid out, then they just won't attend anymore.
Yeah.
But back then there wasn't actually, there were 2 or 3 large tournament organizations around. There was World Cyber Games, there was CPL, and there was
ESWC in France, maybe? ESWC in France, maybe?
Oh yeah. So right, ESWC as well, and nationally there was the EPS and maybe some small tournaments where you could win some hard drives. But
right. By the way, one other social question I have that people are going to forget about this era, because obviously the world's very different. Like if you go to, think about ESL now, they've had loads of events in Cologne, in the Lanxess. It's a thing, esports now. But what they won't remember, Jonas, is back in this era, actually Germany was really against first-person shooter games like Counter-Strike and Quake, because famously there was like a school shooting or something. I know people think that only happens in America, but it happened in Germany. And so as a result, I believe actually there was like a sort of social stigma against these sorts of games, right?
Yeah, so I think this was, there definitely was like a lot of press against shooting games, which was, let me try to remember exactly. They basically said that people that play shooters or first-person shooters are more likely to be aggressive or to,
they make you violent, basically.
People. So I think there was the incident you talk about. I'm not exactly sure, but I think it was like he also had Counter-Strike or shooter installed on his PC.
Which, to be fair, everyone did back then, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I think everyone back then played Counter-Strike. I think this was one of the things that I liked about the game. But to go to the point, I think this gave it some kind of a stigma. There was also one guy who was going through talk shows who was repeating this over and over. I think his name was Dr. Pfeiffer or something.
Oh, right.
And like he was basically doing this over and over. So it was kind of hard to have these tournaments. And I think this was one of the reasons why also other games such as FIFA or so what the tournament organizers did, from what I can remember, is they also added other games into the mix. So it wasn't like a FPS only tournament, but I think the viewership was mostly on Counter-Strike back in the day.
Right. By the way, one piece of trivia people might not know is in your team, as you say, the player NEO was very famous. He had this movie, he'd been at these CPLs. Well, obviously now everyone knows the Polish NEO, the guy who was from Pentagram and all that. You were actually the guys, you maybe remember this, who went to that LAN, the Lehnitz LAN, which was actually basically the first tournament where that team like shocked the world. Like, at the time, I can tell you, they used to, Polish teams at the time, went, no one, even if you saw them in a bracket in a tournament, you'd go, that's a free win. Like, who the fuck are these guys? But I saw at this tournament, this was the first time they kind of shocked the world and they beat you guys. It was NEO and Taz. It wasn't the total same lineup that later on won all the trophies, but it was a couple of the big names. Do you remember this event? Was it a shock?
Yeah, I think for us it was kind of a shock. I would have to say we probably also underestimated them a little bit at the time. Going to a, let's say, more local LAN party, I mean, Lehnitz LAN was not like a huge event by any means where there was a lot of prize money attached even. So I wouldn't say that we really did prepare for the tournament. Arguably, I think we should have won this. We probably didn't prepare enough, but in the end, huge props. I think this was, they were super good players flying under the radar. And this is kind of also what I mean, or what I meant earlier when I said, there were a lot of teams that were probably very good, but they simply didn't have the means to attend these tournaments. And this kind of probably is the same thing why they went to this Lehnitz LAN, which was where they could probably go by car or by train or however, which was around, I think around the Berlin area, if I recall. So yeah, this was kind of, I think, a good starting point for them, and probably also boosted their career or the willingness of their sponsors to support them going to tournaments a lot more.
Right, this is where I actually just have a really good memory for things that actually you probably can't find if you look on the internet. So if people wonder how you stopped being a pro, one of the reasons I remember was they had this event. It was another one in Korea. It was called the World Esports Games. It was one on TV, and mousesports got invited. But actually at the time, some people didn't attend the event with them. Like people like Blizzard and a few other people went. But I remember even they played actually famously with an American player. I know you were one of the players who didn't go. Can you remember what the reason why you didn't attend this event was?
I think it was this event. So, truth be told, I think back then in mousesports there was some, let's say, you play together for a long time, but there's not always agreements on everything, right? I think that, let's say, I don't think everyone was super happy with always being top 3 and everything, and everyone had, let's say, different ideas what the reason for that was. Right. At the time, there was a tournament where they said, okay, you know, we would like to take someone else in here and there. And of course, I wasn't happy, arguably, about the whole thing. But in the end, that was how it is. I think they didn't do very well at this tournament.
No, they didn't. No.
So, I mean, I would say kind of proved my point. I mean, it's always easy to point fingers, like, what is the thing? It wasn't really about, I think the discussion wasn't really about individual skill. I think it was more about that they felt that this player would fit in better with their play style or whoever. And yeah, there were also some disagreements on how we should play or why we had lost or something. But yeah, there's no hard feelings. I think this is the same for every sport. Back then, there wasn't a coach, right?
Sure.
So in today's game, you would have a coach who would say, okay, these guys are playing or those guys are playing. I think they're maybe not for Counter-Strike, I think, but for some other games, there's even teams that have more players than would play at one time, and they would switch in one or the other depending on who they play against. So this is really, I think this is really, it sounds worse than it is in this case, but yeah.
Because the thing I was going to ask was this: since at this point in time when you went like inactive and then eventually you only came back, I remember, as a stand-in for like an EPS or something. But aside from that, like that's the end of like your professional career in terms of being a competitor. So the reason what I would ask is this, Jonas, which is you were only 20 years old. It's not like you were like 30 and you had a job and a mortgage and 2 kids or something. Why exit the scene? Surely you could have gone to another German team or started over again. Is there a reason to kind of just stop playing?
Yeah, okay. I think for me in Germany, there was really only one team that I felt connected to, which was mousesports. And I would still say at the time I quit, it was the best German team.
Sure.
I also have to say, and this is one of the factors, over the years, I enjoyed playing Counter-Strike less, simply because there's a difference if you play something. When you started with Counter-Strike, let me just start a bit how it started, right? Back then, I think one of the main things of Counter-Strike was everyone was playing it. And when I say everyone, it's like everyone, you know? So it was like a game really connecting people. It was fun. You would play a lot, and if you play a lot, you would get good at it. And then there came tournaments and everything. I really like playing tournaments. I like the practicing aspect and everything about it. But at some point, I don't know, I wouldn't say I kind of felt like it's not the thing anymore for me, but also with the turmoil, I would say, in the team where, yeah, there was some shift. I mean, I think they also played with Element and for some time.
Yes.
Yeah, I was like, well, do I have the energy to play somewhere else or do something? And I felt, well, maybe not. At that time, I was finished with school, so I did work for some time for Logitech in the US, and also after that a little bit in Germany. I think it was 2005, 2006, something like that. I'm not exactly sure anymore. And after that, I started working for SteelSeries, which I met at some event, and I played some mice for them. And one of my other passions, I'm not sure people know, it's always been computer hardware a little bit. And I had all the mice you could have back then. I think it was one of the few people who bought a Razer boom slang way back in the day from the US.
Right.
Not want to even say this the mouse was good, but we came to this metal tin, I remember, and I think the import tax and shipping cost was higher than the cost.
Right.
Yeah. So this was one of the things I like to do, and I mean, I'm to this day still in the field, hardware field.
Yeah.
Right. So I still do gaming mice and these kinds of products. Yeah, but I would say from a professional career standpoint, part of it was the game wasn't, at least at the time, as fun anymore for me. And also, I don't know, I felt like, like working or doing something else was then also pretty good. I have to say, it's not like I stopped gaming. I played a lot of World of Warcraft after, which I think a lot of people played at the time.
Yeah.
Also. And I tried to return to CS at some point, but I simply just didn't really get back into it. It's at that time, after I quit, I followed the scene quite closely. I watched a lot of games and everything, but that also got a bit less over the years. I think one thing is very interesting to look at Counter-Strike, at least when I look back, is at some point I was almost convinced that Counter-Strike was like kind of dying down. There were like less tournaments.
Absolutely.
But it made an immense rebound. I mean, I would have never bet on this. So, but I mean, now it's the most popular game on Steam. And it's the most popular FPS title. I really like the game. I haven't really played Counter-Strike 2 on any bigger levels, but it's amazing. I mean, if you look at StarCraft in contrary, this game has somewhat disappeared. I think it was a bit of the problem for Blizzard, but I think Counter-Strike, crazy. I mean, could have never imagined it. I mean, back then we were wishing for esports to become what it is today.
Sure.
But I would have never imagined that Counter-Strike would be the game like 10 years later after I actually quit,
Yeah.
I always imagined there would be the next game or the next things, but pretty crazy.
I mean, let me give you an example along those lines then, Jonas, which is if you think of the early LAN parties, like I'm saying, the stigma around FPS games at the time, it must be crazy to think of, like, if you see when they do ESL IM Cologne now, they sell out the Lanxess Arena as like 18,000 fans. I remember in 2019, they had a major in Berlin, mate. It was in like that fucking like amazing stadium that was like on the concert hall or something. It must be wild to see that when you come from the early German scene.
Yeah, it's completely wild. I remember comparatively I visited one or two events, of course, that were fairly large, but not in the recent years. But what's pretty crazy is I remember the first Intel Friday night game, and there were at most a couple hundred people. And I think most of the people were or maybe working for ESL
Sure.
Teams or everything. So it wasn't really something where there was a fan base attached to the game or the teams that would really go physically to watch these games, right? And it's especially more amazing because today streaming and moderations and everything, it's so much more professional. So in theory, there shouldn't be a reason to go to these tournaments to watch them.
Yeah, sure.
I would say there should be a reason, but it's like it's really like something that it's like a real sport. I think this is the best way to put it.
Yes.
Like people like to watch it live as much as it can be. And I think one of these things that's crazy there and I think this we only had at CPL and maybe World Cyber Games, is when you play on stage and there's some kind of how to say, there's like spectators there that cheer live to what you're doing. That really adds a different level to playing a game at home where you are like in the zone and everything. I think this also plays into a bit the issues or the problems that people had at LAN parties where you would, get very nervous, and people expect you to do well, and like all these people are looking at you. It's different than you sit at home and in your, let's say, controlled environment.
One thing I actually know, because I know a lot of people in the industry and I've been around a long time, is, as you say, people think you just disappeared and stopped playing the game. But obviously, as you say, you had work within the hardware and gaming side of the gaming industry. And I actually know that over the years, many people told me they'd met you at events or they'd come to companies that you worked with. And one thing I heard was that you're one of those people where maybe your name now isn't as famous as obviously the modern stars are huge. They're all Twitch stars, millions of followers. But I've heard that when you go to these like conventions or you meet people in the industry, you still meet people who are from that era who are like, oh my God, are you Johnny R? Do you get that? Do you get like the odd person who just recognizes you somehow?
Yeah. So this, this still happens. I think it's more people that are in, I would say, our age group.
Sure.
That remember those times. I think the younger generation, they are, I would say, more or less unaware of the history of Counter-Strike or the old history. I think a lot of people back in the day, they did a tremendous job growing esports to maybe where it is today, or they laid the groundwork. Not even talking to players, but talking about the ESL or some tournament organizers and everything. And of course, you still know some people, and it's even in the computer hardware industry and some others, there are still people around that did play Counter-Strike back then. Not all of them professionally, but most of them are actually still somewhat connected to the game. I have to admit, though, it's rather a rare occasion, but I think this has simply to do with I haven't really been to that many esport focused events. Yes, I plan to go to. There was this major in Shanghai. I wanted to go there, but then I was in China at the time, as I also am right now on a business trip. But I wanted to buy a ticket, and then it was sold out. And then I was like, okay, screw it. Then I'm not attending. But there's definitely, still a scene, or let's say a group of old school people around in different positions. But I'm probably not the only one that is doing something still in the field. Maybe not direct. I think Blizzard is now.
He works with Big Clan, I think, right?
Yeah, with Big Clan. I think the Yilmaz, one of the mousesports founding investors, is also still with them. Roman R is still active for Big Clan. So but they weren't from the start, as far as I recall. No. So they were like connected a bit and then got back into it. So I think even for me, will always be a connection to gaming. For me, it's now more through a hardware kind of field. And I still like playing games, but I travel a lot for work. So playing FPS games on a notebook with a super high ping is probably not a great thing to do. But I think this is there's a lot of people are, even from back in the day, which surprises me, they are still around in esports. Not directly in the capacity as a player, but either in a management position, in a, let's say, marketing company that caters to esports, or maybe in a esports journalism kind of thing.
Sure.
Like you are, right?
What about, at the end of this interview, one of my last questions is, as you say, there's going to be people from the old school who remember you, maybe newer people don't. What would you like people to think of when they think of Johnny R? What legacy would you like to leave in Counter-Strike?
Well, I think you can always argue who was the best player. I would never want to say, regard me as the best player or anything. I think what I would like people to remember is that I was probably one of the few people who really furthered German esports or formed German esports through a lot of things. Not only through the teams that we did, but also through we did a lot of media interviews and media.
By the way, you were one of the few people I ever saw who was German who did interviews in English. Most of them, if I went to an event and I asked like Roman R, he's going to pretend he doesn't speak English, mate. You're actually one of the only people I ever saw do English interviews. That was a big deal.
Yeah, I think my summer camp in the US helped me a little bit that I did when I was, I think, 12 or 13,
right.
2 years in a row. And I always liked watching movies in that are not dubbed. I mean,
right.
in Germany, this used to be one of the big issues in Germany, that you had dubbed movies in the cinemas and everything, whereas in the Nordics you had mostly original tones with subtitles.
Yes.
I think, which is the standard in other countries. So I would say during my time the English level was fairly limited. For a lot of people, my mother was an English teacher.
Oh, right.
So not English teacher, but she taught elementary school and also basic English, right? So she was, if you had teachers as parents, but then they take really care that you learn a thing or two outside of school as well. And I would credit her a lot with my English skills back then, but also my interest in computer hardware, because if you were building your own computer back then and working with computer hardware, going through forums, there was not a lot available in German. It was mostly all English. Right. So that was there. So I think I want to be remembered as a person who was deeply involved in the growth of Counter-Strike and esports in Germany. I think that pretty much sums it up. And also, of course, probably as a good player, but I wouldn't want to say I was the best or anything. This, I think, is nothing that anyone should claim, I would say.
Since you were so iconic with the AWP, who is Johnny R's favorite AWPer? Who did you like?
I think that's a really good question. I think back in the day, there were like Fraud, K-Sharp from the US. In Germany, it goes depending how far back you go. There were people that were famous also, like Gladiator, and it's really long ago. Good question. If I had to name one, I think probably K-Sharp used to be the most famous one.
Yeah.
At the time, but maybe this was because he was I think the Swedish teams, they never really had any AWPers back in the day.
Yes, true.
And this led to the fact that people would really look at the US teams first, because they were at all the CPL events in the US, which were like driving the masses. And I think then at the US teams, they were the most famous. So this is also what we looked at. So I would say probably K-Sharp on an international level was the most famous one that I recall.
Okay. At the end of this interview, Jonas, do you have a final message? Do you want to shout anyone out or say hello to anyone?
Yeah, sure. I would like to shout out to Tom Lemke, who I think he made the connection for you to me, or shared the contact data.
Sure.
He's also one of the founding members of Mystical Lambda and back then mousesports. And to this day, we still get around very well. He's one of my best friends. So of course he gets the shout out. And we both still enjoy playing games, but both not really Counter-Strike anymore. And even he is also still, or was until the recent years, attached with a marketing company to the esports scene and everything. So I think for me also esports and gaming, it will always be a part of my life, but not as a player. But so he for sure gets the shout out here.
Dankeschön.
No problem. Thank you.
They say no man is an island. We all need people who've got our back. And supporting me and the content on my channel are the following people: Matt Pugnaccio Racula, The Concept, Animosity, Bane Diesel, Ben Glass, Jason, Jensen Gore, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it, always a special thanks goes up to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Do you want to ask a question for my video AMA? Do you want to take part in one of those lengthy discussions where I talk about whatever topics are on your mind? Do you want teasers, find out who the upcoming guests are, or maybe even to suggest a guest or a topic for my content? If any of those perks or others catch your fancy, well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today, where? In the Patreon link in the description box below.